that's the thing about creation. Once you put it out there, I think it was Yoko Ono who says, like, you know, once you create, whatever you create, it ripples infinitely, even without you knowing it. And it can be affecting people or places and spaces without you even understanding how. And I like that idea.
Hi, I'm Karen from NME, and I'm here with Kelly Lee Owens. We are in Naarm, Melbourne for Rising Festival. Hi Kelly, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm really good. How are you?
I'm good. So we are talking to you, right before you kick off this slew of festival dates, right? So now we're in Australia, but you're going to be going to UK, Ireland, and Europe as well. So how are you feeling kind of as you're about to jump into all these festival dates?
Yeah, because I've been up since 6 a.m. I'm a little tired. However, accepting the fact that this is how I'm going to feel for the next 3 months, but also so excited. I get to play like in a song and the last few albums to people, and got to do a little bit of that last year, but this kind of feels like a big culmination of everything I've been working towards, like amazing supports, like big festivals. So I'm just stoked, like can't wait.
Yeah, it's this like familiar but super exciting tiredness, I imagine.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there you are, my old friend. Here we go. We're off again. So
And we're sitting in the green room at Max Watts in Melbourne, where Kelly's going to be playing for Rising later tonight. So what is your live show looking like so far?
Well, it's kind of built on from the first album live show, where I've expanded on like the visuals, and we have like beautiful tailored visuals for every single track. It's kind of delving into my world. I like to take people on a journey. And yeah, it kind of starts quite expansive and a bit mysterious, coming out a little hood, kind of, doing this sort of arpeggi opener, like rising up from the depths, and then ending with like something being pretty banging actually, and a very like big club moment. So I'm building up towards that sort of crescendo at the end. So it's a lot of fun.
I love it. I'm super excited to see you tonight. And because you talked about building up to this big club crescendo, but the album that you just put out, LP8, is not quite as clubby as some of your previous material. So what's it been like to kind of adapt your new album to the live show?
Well, this one actually so far hasn't featured in my live show. What I've done is separated that into another world entirely. So we were talking before about briefly this listening session that I did with it at Phoenix Centre in Sydney, where it's more about an immersive experience. I had people lying down, sitting down. I had a scent that I've made with this company called Heckles, which I'm wearing now, to elevate the sound. Actually, it's purposefully designed to go with that record. So that actually at the moment is just for proper deep listening sessions. It hasn't quite made it into the set just yet, because I feel like people are now, they're ready to go out and dance, and LP8 is something for like this inner journey,
Okay, so actually you audiences might not hear a lot of LP8 when you go out on tour.
Yeah, so far that's right. And I think like if I'm gonna play it live, it needs to be specifically designed for that special somehow, and like I say, it exists in its own world. So I think it's already cooking up in my head. But this summer, it's not really for summer festivals. Let's just say.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I like that you keep bringing up the word design, because when I listen to the album, like it's really much about sound design and construction as well, besides melody and vocals and all of that. So like how and this record is very much described in the bio as an outlier, right? So at which point did you realize that maybe I want to step away from the club for a sec and then go in a more kind of structural direction?
I think obviously with everything that's gone on the last few years, it was a time where we could just step into any place we wanted to as human beings, as artists, in our imagination. And I felt like I had a free pass. It was like, you just have this time and there's no expectations. You've just put out an album. So why don't you go into a studio and see what you can create? And it was made in 8 days in Oslo. It was minus 16 degrees. I felt like I was in a snow globe. I'd escaped London. The borders had closed in Norway. So I was kind of like trapped there, but kind of happy about it. And I just allowed this like real deep subconscious energy to flow through me, and literally sat with a synth on my lap capturing sounds. And within 8 days, I'd made 80 minutes and 8 seconds of sound, and hence this 8 kept coming back up. And also felt like I'd made my 8th record, like something Bjork would make, you know, on her 8th record, and just go, there you go. I've done my pop duty now, and here we are. So
yeah, it's like you can have the experimental part now that you've seen the pop sides of me.
Yes, the pandemic allowed for me to just go there, and like I say, not have much pressure kind of connected with that. So yeah, it is an outlier, but it's also very much part of me. It's part of my subconscious, and I was tapping into a lot of my Welsh heritage and ancestry, and even Olga on the album is Jeanette's mother, and Jeanette was kind of, you know, a track title on my last album, and Olga played organ for 52 years in our local church, and so I was kind of paying, like, it was like an ode to Olga. So the big deep bass sounds you hear, it's almost like the representation of organ pipes. You know, they run like half the length of a church, and the bass that emanates from an organ is just unbelievable. So there was that element, and then the sort of choral Welsh element as well, with my own voice creating choirs. So there's moments like that on there. Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds, I love that it's so intentional, and like you're paying homage to, like, you know, a person, but also an instrument as well. Yeah. And I also noticed that there's a song on the record called Nana's Piano as well.
Yeah.
So is that your grandmother?
So yeah, this is it's the most vulnerable moment for me on the album, and possibly ever in any music I've made, because this was recorded on, as you can hear, an out-of-tune piano in the house that I was residing in when I was going through the stuff that inspired Inner Song. Also, my Nana, Jeanette, had just passed, and so I just played this thing and recorded it on my iPhone. So kind of like an Aphex moment, you know, Aphex Twin there, just like going
off the cuff,
off the cuff. Me thinking though it would never be heard. Like I don't play piano, I don't read or write music, unlike Olga. Mine's all from intuition and an expression of emotion. And so yeah, the birds that you hear as well, they were recorded in Wales in my Nana's garden, and it sounded like, when I put the two together, like a call and response moment, and there was some synergy there. And so that's kind of this like real emotional, deep, kind of quite organic moment as well. It's the only moment where there's actually found sounds on the album, so a little breather, you know.
And you mentioned that you explore your Welsh heritage a little bit more on this album, and I think there's the song Anadlu, which, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but it means to breathe, right?
Yes.
So like, what was it like to kind of, you know, be in Oslo, you know, and, you know, this kind of different, very specific environment, and to be reflecting on your Welsh heritage while you're there?
I think actually what it allows for when you're in a different space or different country is just like greater sense of perspective and a wider reflective space. Being there such a strange time, you know, it was also January. There's something about January in the Northern Hemisphere anyway that's like really dark, you know, and quite difficult.
It's pretty bleak.
It's bleak, and but something about that cracks you open almost, you know. So after my Nana passing, me putting out in a song in this strange time, you know, doing all the big things like moving house, putting out an album in a pandemic, like must be crazy, and then stopping for a moment, it just allowed me to really tap into the things that I was feeling. Whilst, and this was my deepest intention, sort of casting spells of hope for the future. I wondered what the future would sound like, or what we had to deal with in the present moment to get to that future place with kind of more clarity and certainty. It was a time of deep reflection, I feel. It was we had the space for that anyway, so I went there.
Those spells that you cast, did any of them, you know, come to pass at all?
It's more like a collective thing, but yes, I would say very slowly I'm seeing subtle shifts of things that I would hope in the way the world would go. And so, you know, it's early days, but yeah, there's still, that's the thing about creation. Once you put it out there, I think it was Yoko Ono who says, like, you know, once you create, whatever you create, it ripples infinitely, even without you knowing it. And it can be affecting people or places and spaces without you even understanding how. And I like that idea.
Yeah. When you were making LP8, I understand that you were working with just one other very close collaborator.
Yeah, Lasse Marhaug. So I've never worked with him before, but he's worked with my label, Small Town Supersound, a lot. And he's a noise artist. So, and I knew this going in, and I'm like, again, strange time. All right, I guess we'll see what happens. And we met in this really interesting place, you know, him coming from that background, myself from a kind of electronic, but, you know, more pop sensibility background, indie kind of, you know, band scene and all these things. And it was really just like, felt like magic. Like he is perhaps not what you think of a noise artist to be. He just was so gentle and so full of intention as well, and that word intention, like you say, kept coming back up. So with that, we would meet every morning for coffee, and this album was going to be called Rituals because I felt like they were sonic rituals, but it almost seemed too obvious. But part of our ritual was to meet every morning, talk for 2 hours.
Wow.
And say, well, what do you want the future to sound like? But also, what's difficult now, and how do we approach that? Because this wasn't about the listener being comfortable the whole time or being held. I felt I did that with Inner Song. I was kind of holding people through their like real vulnerable moments. And in this one, I'm holding space, I think, in a very different way. It's a bit more raw.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's why the first track, Release, is kind of like, it's like, so you're either within the first minute, you know if you're going to continue on that journey or if you're not ready to step in, and it's okay if you're not. This isn't going to be for everyone, at least not now, and that's okay. But yeah, it's like that sonic place to be, somewhere to step into, you know.
Yeah, like it's this world and you can come in, but if you don't want to, like you can come back another time.
Yeah, and like, the beginning and the end are very like hard, you know. It's funny, they're kind of like you say, like walls almost, you know, sonic walls. And so yeah, do you want to break it down and see what's peeking through the cracks the other side, or not yet?
Yeah, and I think the press materials for the album also mentioned that, you know, there was this really amazing, you know, sentence, which is that both of you wanted to aim for something that was between Throbbing Gristle and Enya.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, like, are two amazing different reference points.
Yeah.
So how did, you know, was this something that were these artists that you were kind of like already listening to at the time, or was it as you were making the album that you realized, oh, this sounds a little bit like Throbbing Gristle, but with moments of Enya here and there?
It felt like those two references were the place that Lassa and I can understand each other.
Oh, interesting.
So, you know, with the noise aspects, but also like, yeah, Throbbing Gristle I would listen to myself a lot, you know, working in record stores for 10 years and, you know, all those things coming from like UK and Europe's like super interesting sounds and textures. And I'm interested in textures in my productions. Like everything I've made is all about that, you know. I almost see the sound that I create, not in a way of synesthesia, but like as a texture, and I'm almost sewing things together in my mind and as I'm listening. It's hard to explain, but with Enya, for me, coming back to the Celtic reference, so a kind of Celtic icon, I would say, you know, who just does her thing, invites you into a world.
Yeah,
like she has
absolutely.
her own sonic place to be, you know, and she also does sing in her native tongue. And I'm inspired by that as well, especially with Gaelic. Like that definitely, you know, has been a dying language. Welsh was at one point, you know, but isn't now, fortunately. But yeah, I felt a deep connection. And so Lassa, Enya, and okay, maybe Throbbing Gristle. But they were just loose sort of places to join the dots, really. Yeah.
Amazing. And after you put out In a Song in 2020, last year you did a couple of like really interesting kind of like poppy, but also like I guess mainstream facing kind of collaborations. So the first one is you remix a song by Sigrid, Mirrors. So I mean, I love the take that you put on that song. But you know, what goes through your mind when you're asked, you know, here's a super pop song, you know, put your own spin on it?
I just said, yes, let's go. I was, in that moment in time, I was so up for it. It was like, I think I just made LP8. I just finished it. No one knew or anything. And so it's like, what is great about creating is you bounce off yourself. So I was ready to just go full pop in that moment. And I just was like, let's just take it and run with it. And the song was so incredible, like so well written, like amazing pop music. I have so much respect for Sigrid, and you know, she was involved in this sort of towards the end, the back and forth. Okay, well, it's here, but I think you can maybe add, and you know, so it's like she's super involved as well. Only in the end, but like she was like, this is one of my favorites. Like I love it, and so we just both vibed off each other. And I love to remix other women. That needs to happen more often, and it's part of my like trajectory. Like that's what I want to do, so it just worked out well. Yeah,
because when you have like when women remix other women, two different women's like visions of art coming together, especially when it's as collaborative as that.
Absolutely. And like people who respect each other genuinely, like I don't say yes to stuff that I don't like or I don't think I can do something really wonderful with, because even if it's like, oh, we'll pay you, and I say no to things like more often than people might presume. And this one I was like, I just knew what I could do with it and where I could take it, and it was just interesting for me to step into that pop sensibility. Like I grew up in, you know, mainly the 90s, like, you know, pop was everywhere, R&B, and so like, yeah, those spaces I'm intrigued by, and I'm kind of stepping closer to every time, even though I've just made a kind of noise record. So, yeah.
And speaking of making something wonderful, you also did the theme song for the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2023, which is going to be happening in Australia and New Zealand. So, I mean, it's an amazing collaboration. So how did that come about?
Oh, this is one of the kind of those music industry moments where it's like, I'm signed with Decca Publishing, who are wonderful, Decca Universal, and they work with FIFA a lot. And FIFA, the Women's World Cup, were specifically, of course, after a woman to write, produce, and create their new theme song, and they wanted someone who loved, who could go kind of big, but also use natural found sounds, probably electronic. So all these descriptions just led like Universal Lemon to be like Kelly Lee Owens, and I actually genuinely feel like it was a great match, and something so big for me, thinking, oh my god, can I actually do this? And we had a meeting. I think there was like 50 people on the meeting, and it was like 8 a.m. and I'd had my coffee and I was sort of bleary-eyed, but I was listening to what they were saying, and they genuinely care. They have a vision that's beyond football. This isn't just about, it's like women on the world stage ultimately, and giving them platforms to do these incredible things. And so I kind of felt like part of that family, and it genuinely inspired me. So yeah.
Amazing. And like those found sounds on the track, what did you incorporate for the song?
Well, I'd heard about the wagtail, Willy Wagtail, and so I found some samples of the wagtail bird online and used that as a percussive tool in the track, which is really fun. And then kind of more obvious stuff like cicadas, which are like everywhere, and they were another percussive kind of inspiration and element. And then in a way, so using some like found sounds on my body, so like body stomps to represent the haka and stuff. So like, yeah, I just wanted to just have references as opposed to really like, I couldn't go to Australia at the time, but here we are, and it's exciting that I'll probably be here next year when it's all kind of kicking off, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, and will you I imagine that your theme song will be played in these like massive stadiums, right? Isn't that like amazing to think about?
Absolutely. And you know what, when I was writing it, I was thinking about it. I wasn't 100% sure if it would be, but I was going for that stadium energy. And I remember going to Old Trafford, Manchester United with my dad when I was younger on like weekends in the family stands. And, watching football on the TV, for me, I was like, yeah, this is okay. But like, there's nothing like being there. Like that collective communal energy, and that's why I use kind of layers of choirs as well, of all different ages as well, just to represent that whole scope of people, and so it's going to be good.
Amazing. And maybe a little bit more serious question to end things off, but you're looking at a bunch of tour dates in Europe, at different festivals, and I think it was last year that you cancelled your Europe tour, and you spoke to NME as well about how the structural issues with Brexit and the pandemic, all kind of create this pressure on individual musicians like yourself, who are like, many of them independent, trying to set up their own tour because, they need to earn income to survive, right? So, and now you're kind of going back on a festival tour, which is a little bit different from a headline. But, how are you feeling at this point? And, are you still feeling that same anxiety that you spoke about last year?
Yeah, I think like the anxiety that we're speaking of came from all those things you just mentioned. So this toxic concoction, as I called it, of like the global pandemic and then Brexit, and then now also just like being these like supply issues. So even like airports at the moment. So I am anxious about traveling in the summer holidays this year. Trying to get to places even that is going to be difficult. Now, if this was me 4 or 5 years ago, it just would not be financially viable in any capacity. The only way I can tour Europe at the moment, as you can see, is via festivals. Festivals tend to be higher fees because they sell more tickets, just being real. So it's like that actually makes it financially viable. Doing my headline shows at the moment would not still. So the work permit thing is being worked out, but there are so many kinks to still iron out, and it's such a tumultuous time still for people, so I really do feel for artists that are up and coming, and I just wanted to be real about it, because I feel like talking about just pretending everything's great and amazing and like, I can afford anything. That's not the case. Like, I come from a working class background. Everything I've created myself. No one's given me any handouts. I haven't even had like advances from like my label or anything like that. Like, publishing, yes, but I think like basically I'm very DIY, and there's a very fragile ecosystem that's in place with that stuff. So
after speaking out about these issues, did you have any rising up and coming artists kind of coming to you and saying like, you are 100% correct. Like, what was the reaction like?
Yeah, just like people like DMing me a lot and just saying like thanks for just keeping it real basically. And I went on like BBC News as well and kind of calling out the government and talking about the structures that are in place and just saying that like, you know, even with streaming as well, it's just not working for artists. And what are the things that kept us saying, you know, take away all the music out of your house, take away all the artwork, take away all the films. Would you have got through a pandemic? I don't think so. It's a thing we need to value. We need to put the value back in artistry ultimately.
For sure. And I think the last thing I want to ask you about is actually a tweet that you sent recently because no, it's
I forget people are actually like looking at these things, you know, but yeah.
Like, because earlier in the interview you brought up that Yoko Ono quote about how, you know, you put something out there and it ripples and you don't know how it's going to affect. So when you tweeted recently that you want to sing Teardrop with Massive Attack.
Yeah, I will never take that back. That is 100% what I want to happen. And I remember, I think it's Robert, like he DJ'd like Bird at some like Extinction Rebellion thing a few years ago, and I was like, they know I exist. I'm like one step closer, but like that track.
I mean, it's a classic, like,
oh my god,
drop dead classic.
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth Fraser, one of my favorite singers in the world. It's obviously a big thing, a big task. But I would be up for at least kind of trying. Like, I'd even like audition. Like, I'm not, my ego is not that. I would audition if they were. I just think it would be a beautiful moment. And for me, like a big culmination. And if Elizabeth isn't free, then
Massive Attack, you know who to call. Please reach out. Kelly, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Have a wonderful time at Rising and for all of your festival dates.
Thank you so much.